Mr. Chairman, your meeting is live.
Representative Henderson, Representative Larson, Representative Sherwood, Representative Stith, Representative Walters,
Here.
Representative Swanitzer,
Here.
Senator Anderson, Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator Nethercott, Senator Salazar, Co-Chairman Kinski,
Here.
Chairman Nicholas. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to interim. We've got a list that's been passed out. So, Mr. Co-Chair, my preference I would like to go through the committee's preferences first before we go through the list.
Okay.
If the committee itself, any members has a particular topic that you'd like to discuss, to me, those get priority. And so, so far away, anyone who wants to.
Mr. Co-Chair,
Go ahead.
we had a question when we were going through the topics, and it's on page 2 at the bottom. The committee will review the practice of amending general appropriations legislation outside the general appropriations bill into single subject standalone legislation. So I'm not sure who that came from. We wanted to get a little bit better idea where that was going. We were interested. But we were not quite sure we understood it.
Go ahead.
That really is a result of, as we got working through the two water bills, the planning and the construction bill, they had taken the budget bill and inserted it into the water bill and then made adjustments to our budget. And the concern as we have visited and sought a little bit of clarification, is this a normal thing? The concern is that if we start letting committees do that, it has the potential of upsetting really the budget process in a whole and as a whole. And so I just maybe we don't know everything we need about it. Just clarify, is that an acceptable policy that the House and the Senate would want to accept from standing committees to do that? Or how do we address that? Is that's where that comes from.
So I'll defer to my fellow committee members for any questions, but the one that comes to mind is, explain to me what was in the water bill other than an appropriation. Lots of bills have appropriations, but there must have been something above and beyond that water.
So, for example, when that agency came in before this committee for their standard budget request, we had funded and the agency out of Water One, and then we had there were no exception requests for additional funds, for example, in Water 3 or for projects. What happened in their bill is then they come in and struck the lines that we had in place in the budget bill, adjusted the Board of Control, made it with footnote, made it come out of with general funds, and then implied in the footnote that that would be the case moving forward. Those are exercises we do in this committee in the budget hearing. Now, historically, what has happened when you have a water bill, and say, for example, in Water 3, where you may have a number of projects maturing in the process and getting ready to go out for construction, you may find that you are 20, 30, 100 million short. That has generally come in a separate bill, identifying that appropriation from a separate bill, not in there, because the two water bills are really to look at the approved projects and how they're going to fund them. And so that's kind of how that works, Mr. Chairman.
So Don, I think you're familiar with what we're talking about. Tell us what the practice has been in the past and if it happens in other situations besides the water bills. And then the other issue is, are there other ways to do it?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I think the challenge is you end up with conflicting bills, particularly when you have the table in the budget that is also appearing, in this case, 2 other times. There was also a case, not quite the same, but the ARPA bill. There were, I believe, 2 other standalone bills that amended the same table in the ARPA bill. And now it turns out both of those failed. But should they move through the process, then you have this constant conflict and a determination as to which one trumps over the others. I've probably only seen it 3 times this year, and previously maybe 2 others in the past 2 decades. I believe YDOT was put in there. If it becomes a regular practice, you could have the education committee have a table for community colleges, a table for UW, which would compete with the appropriations bill, or the transportation committee could have a table for YDOT, which would compete with the budget bill. So those are the structural issues that are presented.
Mr.
So
Co-Chair.
just to, I think we can kind of do away with this fairly quickly. I think we ought to have Don just present it to us. It'll only take an hour or 2 during the interim. We'll explain it, understand it, and then come up with a policy that we can make a recommendation on. So it's a valid issue, concept, but it's not.
So two things. One is to build to what you just said. If Don could reach out to see what other states do, there may be a best practices. Undoubtedly, others have crossed this bridge. And then to make it just a little bit broader than just this particular area, I know from conversations with Don, as sessions roll along, there periodically comes a point where there's so many different bills voting to do so many different things that it's very difficult even to put together the goldenrod. And is it these sorts of things, or are there other kinds of situations that we should be looking at possibly promulgating a policy on, where it gets too mixed up as it goes through the policy session?
I mean, let me just rephrase that and see if in other words, are there ways that we can simplify what we do and set up some guideposts or parameters to prevent things going down rabbit holes as often as they do?
Mr. Chairman, I think the process does have a safety valve embedded in it, and that is both houses have a joint rule that any bill with an appropriation must go to your standing committee. So you meeting separately as the Senate or as the House have the opportunity to resolve those differences. I acknowledge that for policy purposes, there may not always be an interest in resolving those issues, because you would perhaps want more than one vehicle to accomplish something.
I mean, we have that problem right now. We have 3 different bills for water appropriations.
Okay. Well, so that's fine. Are you okay with having that? Be about an hour, 2 hours.
Okay, anything else?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to look at updating the LSO computer site. And so when we're in session and you have these amendments, I would hope that there'd be a way that we could start interfacing them right into the bill itself. So right now, and I know especially for freshmen, you get your bill, you get your amendment, and then most of us go in and start crossing lines off, and then some of us have to fill in the new wording. And it just seems to me that we should be able to come up with a computer system that interface that much better, maybe put some sideboards on for the public. So I would just like to look into that possibility. I have one caveat, though. I just did have a sidebar here, and it doesn't sound like it would work too good for the appropriation bill, but for all the other bills, it seems very logical. They're doing it manually now, and it just seems like they ought to be able to get that updated.
What page is that on?
I don't know if it's on a page.
No.
We have it now.
So Don, has LSO looked at that on getting a computer program that will automatically update? And, and if actually would be really neat, because if you have 5 amendments and 1 fails and then 1 passes, and that affects the other. And so you could pull 1 out, you put it back in, and then you can move down into the current bill. I mean, some of the bills we did this year, you had 3 or 4 or 5 page amendments, and the idea of how you can put those back together. And then if you do 3 other amendments and then you divide it, I mean, that pharmacy bill was a perfect example. That was a nightmare to try to follow as we were doing it. So I'm just wondering if it'd be interesting to know if other states have programs, or if our computer program could figure that out.
Mr. Chairman, LSO has looked at that. I believe we've traveled to, and I have not been deeply involved in this, but I believe some of our neighboring states, Utah or Colorado, I can't remember which one, does have something like that available to the members on the floor, where it pulls up amendments in that manner. I believe the Select Committee on Technology and Process has been the home for these discussions in the past.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think this is an incredible idea and it would be a great tool for us in our decision-making process on the floor. But I also think that it would provide a higher level of transparency for the public as they're tracking a bill and our actions. And just would like to add a nuance of if there would be a way to update the way a bill can be tracked through the process, so that members of the public could sign up for an alert. And every time that bill hit first reading, second reading, crossover, then the person who's interested in that bill would get an alert sent to them. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
So I like the idea. I've explored it with our folks a couple of different times. And, you think 50 state legislatures and legislatures around the world, somebody's got to have a program that would instantly put those amendments through there. And we keep coming back to the fact that ours is homegrown. We wrote it ourselves. And then it's got to be somebody with some oomph to push it. I think it's either a management. I don't think it's an appropriations committee bill, but either the Committee on Technology or ideally Management Council, they might have the wherewithal to try and move the thing forward.
I would agree with that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
maybe connecting it back to the Appropriations Committee. We experienced this last session, a challenge with updated fiscal notes. And so we would have bills referred to us that had inaccurate or non-updated fiscal notes that really made it difficult for at least the Senate Appropriations Committee to thoughtfully evaluate those bills. And so how we handle or ask for agencies to update their fiscal notes from the time they submit, we know that if a bill affects an agency, they submit it before session starts. Usually that's sometime in the fall or early January. The circumstances associated with that bill may change, or it may be amended in a way where that fiscal note is substantively altered. And so how do they resubmit that fiscal note and we get that reattached to a bill draft? An example of that would be, what bill did we do? 99, which was the tax bill. Yeah, one of the property tax bills had a pretty significant fiscal note on it that was no longer accurate by the time we received it, but it did have a $2 million appropriation on it. And that is another one of those bills, I think, that Don was mentioning that constantly changed and was affected by other bills throughout the process as well. So as it relates to the Appropriations Committee and keeping updated, maybe review that process of fiscal notes.
But I would still concur with the co-chair that that's really a management council issue. Who would be the driver for it?
Let's refer it over to them.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
on a new topic, we've seen significant expansion in the historic horse racing machines, and so it is on the list, but I think we ought to look into how to put some restrictions on those historic horse racing machines.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
it's not an Appropriations Committee topic. We ended up with those 3 gaming bills through the last session, and it took a lot of time away from appropriations work. And on the Senate side, our colleagues have made clear to us they want Appropriations Committee staying its lane. There's been times where Appropriations Committee has really ranged far and wide, and we heard about it. And our colleagues like for these things to go to the appropriate standing committee, and I think we have to respect that in the Senate.
Well, unfortunately, those referred to us by your president. So
Yeah, I know.
So
I know. So
I mean-
consistency is not necessarily a virtue everybody has, but I agree. But
and actually, we are probably the most consistent group that has worked the gaming since it was been established. Quite honestly.
Mr.
Chairman, go ahead.
So I recall having these conversations on historic horse racing, the take, the handle, how much the stuff can get in this committee when we was at the Jonah building. I think we repeatedly had this conversation on the impact of historic horse racing on state revenue, where it should go, how it should be handled, and then how we limit it. So I'm not so sure that I agree that it's outside the realm of it. We've been doing it.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I guess for better or worse, we have become gaming's home committee. We've developed a fair amount of knowledge and how it works across the board. And we've spent a lot of hours on all aspects of it. So it seems like, I'm not sure what other committee it would go to that would have had as much dealings with gaming as we've had. Whether that it should have been that way or not is, I think, water under the bridge. But
Okay, next
Mr.
topic.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Chairman Kinski. I think horse racing is good somewhere else. I was on TRW years ago and we started that. And maybe it's got a little out of control, but I think it's for them to put it back in control.
Okay, if you want to go to the list or anyone have a particular?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
on page 7 at the bottom, there was a fairly wide range, proposal for a fairly wide ranging run through the pension plans. And I think our committee as a whole didn't have a whole lot of appetite for it unless there was really a compelling reason. And we felt when we came to page 20, where the WRS did talk about this one particular plan that has some difficulty and the trend line is bad. I think for the Senate committee, we thought that was appropriate to take a look at that one plan as opposed to a holistic view of all plans.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the chairman partially. I would suggest also, if we take that opportunity, that we look at the area of cost of living adjustment and perhaps even contribution. We have multiple inputs in the topics for this important area of retirement. I think there's a lot of appetite among the retirees for a cost of living adjustment. I think it's worth looking into that.
So Mr. Chairman, just to touch back on what our deliberations were, we weren't interested in the COLA, that we don't think we can get anywhere with that. Again, we just thought if there was a plan that was in trouble, that would be worth our time to look at it. Law enforcement appears to be having some challenges. I just throw that out there.
So I do have a question. If we don't look at and review both the pension and the treasurer's office, who does? Who perform, what standing committee performs those things?
I think it's us. We've gone through the pension plans for the last, how many years now? You know, we keep running out and catching the spears. I don't know that a broad run through the plans, we're going to make any more progress than we have in the past.
So the governor has made a request that we do an evaluation of the performance compensation program that we've set up and kind of do a deep dive on whether it's working. Are we measuring it right? Are they the right amounts? Just the program that we put together.
And I think that's in here.
So
What page is that on?
I'm not sure what page it's on. Is there any one from the governor's office who'd like to talk about that? Erica or anybody? Okay. Well, you can do two things here.
This was outlined in here somewhere, Bob.
So the question is, would it be okay to have that as one of our topics? Reviewing the performance compensation of the retirement and the treasurer's office. Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
I would maybe suggest if we go through this list, there might be a number of topics that are worthy of our discussion. We ought to make note of those that we like and those we don't like. Then maybe the chairman come back together and have a round two and pick up those, because they vary in length and commitment that this committee has to have. So maybe we identify the ones we want. Let the chairman come back and say, we're going to move forward with these, and there may be some of those that fall out and some that stay in, but I think this is kind of a refining process today.
You know, I would concur, agree with that too.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So if you would all look at the bottom of page 6 on the topic that I proposed on major maintenance, the concern I have on our construction, both in the state buildings and schools and community colleges, is the structure for which we do. We don't have really a structure for doing routine maintenance. Our major maintenance is really wonky. And then we see sometimes that major maintenance gets turned into capital construction. I just think that there needs to be a more streamlined approach to this, where when we build or make an addition to a building, we know the tentative life cycle of the components of that building. We expect the entity to do routine maintenance. We provide 2.6% square footage of replacement value to go into their major maintenance. But then there's sometimes kind of a free hand on what major maintenance is used for. Major maintenance ought to be used to perform the major maintenance on those components within the building. And so if we know in 10 years, we're going to need a new roof, in 10 years, they should have the money there in their major maintenance account to take care of that roof and not have to come back to us. But we know that gets twisted. And then we get into this component section in schools where, well, it's in some schools there's this major maintenance and it's not quite CapCon, so we're going to do it a component thing, and we just keep circumventing it. And I just think it's costing us a lot of money. And I don't think we can get it completely done this year, but I think we need to lay the groundwork and start looking at approach, because we do appropriate that. We set the percent of the replacement value on the square footage, and we do the CapCon replacements, and I think that we have to have a better understanding of it. And that's all I will say.
So do you have a general outline of how we would go about doing that? How much time it would take?
Mr. Chairman, I think, as we finished up the last couple of schools and we've looked at the State Hospital Life Resource Center in this administration at our construction department have expressed interest, and I think can provide us with a baseline approach to how maybe we would consider this and to educate us. And if we like where we're at, that's fine, but it is so confusing as you go through and see that, and why are we using major maintenance to complete a CapCon project at a school, or it gets wonky, and I don't think it's legislative intent for us to do that. So that's my idea.
Mr. Chairman, I could kind of agree with this subject, not necessarily digging into the weeds on it, because we've got a lot of committees that are into the weeds on this subject, but we need to get this outlined and get it taken care of. This has been an ongoing one since the 80s. I know Kelly Mader and his crew tried to get money set aside for major maintenance, and we're not successful as we'd like to be. So I think this is something we ought to listen to, not necessarily dig into the weeds on every building, that kind of things, but get some kind of a policy set aside.
This is one that our group flagged is of interest.
Okay, I didn't know that was a good flag. You're a bad flag.
Good flag.
Okay, next.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative.
Wyoming Innovation Partnership. That is on page 16. The program is otherwise set to sunset June 30th, 2024. So I think it makes sense for this committee to take a look at that and evaluate it, see if it's working. Maybe if we want to keep the program going or kill it.
So just trying to remember what the parameters or when we did the Wyoming Innovative Partnership, part of the components was some type of a review or analysis to make sure that we're getting the right bang for the buck and that it's a worthwhile endeavor to continue to do.
So Mr. Co-Chair, this is one where what jumped out at me is the words economic development, K-12, UW. This is either an education topic or minerals and economic development topic. It's not an appropriations committee topic. Good topic.
Mr. Chairman. We need to change. Go ahead. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to step back and I'm going to ask the co-chairman at the bottom of page 3, that fire policeman pension, was that the other one you were looking at on pensions? Remember, we talked a little bit back there and there's one you were looking for and couldn't find. And this is the one that Chairman Washit talks about where there's a gap in when they don't pay Social Security, the employer. Okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah, Betsy, since I saw you come in. You want to comment on the
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my apologies, couldn't run fast enough in my office when I heard you brought up the incentive comp performance interim topic. That is definitely something the governor would like for the legislature to look at.
Can you pull the mic just a little bit closer?
The incentive compensation for the investment professionals for the state. That is something the governor would very much like for the legislature to look at. I think it's been in place about 3 to 4 years now. If you think this is a good time to look at that and consider just exactly how it's being implemented, what policies retirement treasurer's office have put together. He has concerns with some aspects of the program are self-reporting and also some ideas about an independent audit maybe would be necessary or would be a good idea for the programs. But he recognizes they are very important and they do help attract high-end investment and highly qualified investment professionals to the state. But he thinks it just is time for another look at that program.
well, and particularly because they are becoming the highest paid individuals in the state of Wyoming, other than a football coach. And so I think it behooves us to make sure that we do it transparently and right and make sure we get our biggest bang for the buck.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, we have a committee on capital finance and investments, compensation of the investment professionals. Wouldn't that be the logical place for that topic to go?
Well, I think the answer is either one, I think works. So, as long as it gets done.
We're all set.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. Okay, next.
Jim, is your microphone on? Or are you just too far from?
Both. Go ahead.
Because the Supreme Court doesn't often have the ability to make recommendations, and they're always really nice to me. I've got this recommendation on page 6 that I would put out there for your consideration and let you look at to see if we need to increase staffing within our administrative office. And maybe they could explain that. I just, as they twisted my arm and made me cry, I think maybe they could explain their intent there a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Elisa Butler and I am the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. This topic really is a request for you all to consider the staffing levels of the Administrative Office of the Courts. Over the last year, the Judicial Branch has taken a hard look at what we've been doing, trying to become more efficient and more effective. And one of the things that we have identified as a problem area is the understaffing of that office. So comparatively to states who are similarly situated in terms of filings and population, we are pretty understaffed. We have 35 employees right now with the 3 new employees that we received this session. Thank you very much. We will be at 38. In comparable states, they are at about 50 or 60. Keeping in mind that we at the administrative office provide a number of functions that are provided in a number of different departments in the executive branch. So we do HR, we do fiscal, we do technology, we do all of that for the entire branch. And so this would just be a request for you to take a hard look at that staffing and hope that we would be able to gain a few more positions to be able to better serve the judicial branch and the people of Wyoming. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So Lisa, I assume that you made the same request to judiciary.
Mr. Chairman, we did.
And so the real question is that you might get friendlier faces in judiciary than you do over here.
I don't think there's any might about it.
Mr. Chairman, the reason for bringing it to you all is because it would be positions and funding primarily. And that is your bread and butter here in appropriations.
Comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would fear that the executive committee would say we're stepping out of our bounds and it's not our business. But I agree that the judiciary committee sure should look into it, make some recommendations. Thank you.
I think the other issue is I don't know what the makeup of the judiciary committee is this year. Are they capable of doing a good job on this issue?
Certainly.
Our judiciary committee is, yeah, I don't know about the House.
about yours,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I do think the request of the court to bring this issue to the Joint Appropriations Committee does make sense because it's about positions and funding. I also think it's probably prudent to put it in front of the Judiciary Committee to educate them. I think there's a lack of knowledge about the court's administrative functions. And so I think it will take longer than 1 year probably to achieve the desired results that the court is looking for. And so starting that education period now is probably important.
So, Mr. Chairman, is there the possibility that this could start out in judiciary and as they get things put together with possible recommendations, then shift over to here to consider what maybe further actions would be warranted? I don't think it would take long.
Well, I would concur with that, but also because it is an independent branch and because it is basically a closed door facility. The only people that know anything about it are the people that are there. So it's always looking inward. The more that you can educate, I think it's our duty to be as educated as possible to understand the full obligations that you have to do and perform. And so I think that we could accomplish that and it wouldn't take that long. In fact, it'd be kind of interesting, I think, for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, circling back to Representative Larson's suggestion that we try to get out on the table what I've got. I just want to see what I've got. Double check my list that I've got so far. Not that we necessarily agree these are the right topics, but we heard historic horse racing. We heard amendments on bills that impact the budget. General appropriations amendments, and then the bill processing for amendments, retirement, law enforcement, or retirement broadly, performance compensation for the investment professionals, major maintenance, WIP, and court staffing. Did I miss anything that's been put on the table so far?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just add for consideration for the committee, the important topic of critical infrastructure, if possible.
So we can go to that now. All right, go ahead, Clark.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to miss an opportunity on topics. On page 15, workplace retirement savings. I think that's again directed toward the private sector, not the public pensions. The idea being that we have a long-term fiscal problem potentially. You've got a lot of people aging, retiring, no savings. They're going to be a drain on the Department of Health, Medicaid system to the extent that they're consuming nursing home beds. So I think that's a topic worth looking at.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
thank you. I second that idea. I think is worth our consideration. Again, that's on the bottom of page 15. In thinking about how we can incentivize long-term stability for our residents. I would also say that I am ready to roll up my sleeves and understand how we as appropriators and the state can invest in ways to reduce cost of attainable housing. And so you'll see here in our handout that there are many of our colleagues throughout the state interested in this topic and understanding the role that the state plays in removing these barriers for workforce, low income, and senior housing in our communities.
Mr. Co-Chair,
Go ahead.
I want to make sure I understand the topic. I'm not sure it's appropriate for appropriations, but I do want to understand the topic. Back when we were just first in the Jonah Center, Senator Anderson did run a bill that was designed to help small employers who don't have a retirement plan get one set up for their employees. It wasn't going to use state money. It was just going to help facilitate it for employers who are too small to put together a 401k and so forth. Is that what this topic is, or is this something else?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it's very similar to what Senator Anderson had proposed years ago. Yes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say that was a great idea. I don't know if it's for this committee, but certainly needs some work on it. That's for sure.
And then, Mr. Co-Chair, just one other question, and might be for Representative Stith. Any employer that uses a payroll service can set up a retirement plan through the payroll service. And so I wonder why that's just not, if they're not doing it, maybe it's just not desired. We may not be able to set up a plan that will induce them to do this.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's the basic human psychology of whether you opt in or opt out. If you're automatically enrolled in something, you're much more likely to participate. And so we have extremely low participation in the private sector on 401ks, especially for lower income people. Yet that the basic idea is to establish more of a default of opt-in. So I think it has a pretty significant long-term fiscal impact worth looking at. And speaking of what's appropriate for this committee or not, generally speaking, back to the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, just for a moment, it's not so much about the Wyoming Innovation Partnership is not so much about our institutions. It's not so much about the colleges or the university. It's about innovation. And we don't have a committee of innovation. We don't have a committee for creativity, right? So that's why I think it belongs here. Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Mr. Chairman, another topic on page 19. I would like to hear from the Office of Tourism Agency that Senator Grew is suggesting, and I think an hour and 30 minutes is probably about right, but I think we ought to listen to what is being done with those funds.
And Mr. Co-Chair, is that actually an interim topic, or is it just something where we have that agency come in and report to us?
Yeah, I think it's combined of both. We know that they will report, but if we want to have more specifics on particular concepts or issues, then we just let them know what those things are. So I would agree with that. Okay, next, any others? Anyone interested in attorney rural practice mission? Okay. Anything else? So that one of the issues, and Betsy, you might help us with this, is do you have a game plan for what committee would cover the ETS and its reorganization and how to integrate that into A&I and
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Erica Legursky, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Gorton. I also have ANI and ETS as my agencies that I study. The conversations that we had with the governor and the reason for bringing that ETS bill to you, Mr. Chairman, and to Co-Chairman Kinski was because we thought that with you being our home committee and then also with the Very Dunn study that JAC had conducted on that you guys would be the best committee to help us facilitate that. integration. And my understanding is I believe that the ANI Home Committee is Management Council. So
Well, and it does occur to me that,
You've got to repeat that last sentence. I didn't hear.
sorry, Senator Kinsky. ANI, I believe their home committee is Management Council, but I'm not sure on that. Or Management Audit, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good home.
well, ETS has been on and off, or we have been the home committee for more than we have not, actually. So I think that the question is, one of the committees has to do it. And so we'll just see how Management Council assigns it. But ETS will be coming in before us anyway, because they present to us and go through the process, how they're doing, their performance, and we evaluate it and fund it. And essentially the bill is drafted, the work is done on how to move forward with it. It's not that complicated, so we could actually do it fairly quickly.
So what is the ETS topic? Just ETS generally, what do we do with it? I thought the governor was already done with it, what he wanted to do with it.
Well, we have to effectuate what the governor does so that we're in sync with the statute.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Kevin, what do you want us to do?
Mr. Chairman, I think over the last 10 years that collaborations with the Governor's Office, State Budget Department, and LSO, we have brought you cleaner and cleaner budget documents that you can see the requests and you can take action on them without making corrections to them. So our focus is going to continue along those lines. And then also, we do have a pretty big lift this year because we got the ARPA return to the budgets for the standard budgets. We got compensation decisions to make along with the vacancy savings for compensation. So it's a pretty sizable lift for us without any additional efforts.
Okay. True enough. Okay, anybody else? Go ahead.
I would only suggest that if we get into a retirement topic, I think that Chairman Washett's conversation on the bottom of page 3 and page 4 is one for us to better understand. And the reason I say that is because if we've heard that on the floor and we've read about how some of law enforcement and others don't get Social Security because they're EMS or social or law enforcement. And so I'm not sure that I understand fully how that works, but I do think that if you've got part of your public employees that are getting a retirement contribution and a Social Security contribution from the employer, and then you got a segment that isn't, but the portion that they are is the same as everybody else's, you've kind of got them an anomaly there that maybe we have to look at. And looking down the road, I'm just not sure that does this then open up the door where we have a significant unfunded retirement benefit. I don't know the answer to that. I just would like to have a little more information on that if we're going to consider some retirement topics.
Okay. Anything else? Senator Salazar, what do you think? What do you want to do? Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to circle back to what Kevin said. I'm very concerned about, I didn't realize we had to revisit the employee compensation again, but that ARPA coming back on the budget is going to be a big deal. It would be nice for us to have a heads up well before December, perhaps before July, as broad brush strokes, the implications of that. So I'd like to see that as a topic that we visit more than once leading up to December.
Well, and I think we get regular updates every time we meet, and then the labor's all done on your part. You just got to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, and so you don't cost us money.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And we can bring those updates each iteration of the Joint Appropriations Interim Committee meetings. And nationally in October, we'll have the Chapter 17 report as well. And I think that's an opportunity for those to make sure that those adjustments are all in line with what takes place in those agencies that are currently enjoying those ARPA, which would be the Department of Corrections, Department of Health, Department of Family Services.
So the other big topic in this pile is issues surrounding housing. And so I'm guessing that just about every committee probably landed with some type of a housing issue in it. But tell us, committee, what your thinking is on what component of housing we would be involved in, if so.
Mr. Chairman, I think we ought to be involved in no part of housing. I don't think we have a part in that, but I do think there's a lot of committees that do have a part in that, but I don't think it ought to come to JEC.
Any other comments on it?
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at this in the lens of, we are the appropriators. We think about how to invest the state's money. I do think that we have a role in taking away the barriers of the high cost of providing attainable housing. Like we did in our budget this year, we provided funds for infrastructure, so water, sewer, utilities, right? So when a private developer comes in or a nonprofit comes in to think about providing this, it's a gap in services right now in our communities. If we can partner with local government and create private-public partnerships to remove the cost of putting in that infrastructure, I do think that's an appropriate role for the state to play in investing funds.
Go ahead.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, at the end of the day, what we don't have figured out is what's the state's role in providing housing. Policy decision somehow needs to be fleshed out. I struggle with it. My question though, because it's not going to go away, if we don't maybe lay a foundation to begin the conversation, is that something that we put over to minerals and economic, under as part of economic development? Who would be the right committee to, because I do think we need to start establishing what the state's policy is.
Corporations is local government, right?
As a component, yeah.
Yeah. Minerals for economic development or corporations for local government. That's where they're working on solutions. That's where the policy really has to come from.
Well, and it is a huge policy, and we do it in almost in every aspect of operations of government. Last year, we appropriated in one fashion or another about $385 million for water projects. That's not economic development and infrastructure. I don't know what is. Currently, we have over $150 million still sitting out there going to be decided of what we did this year. And so, and then if you take all of the various other grants, slip loan boards, decisions, and what we've given out in ARPA, it's that's all we've been doing is economic development in some ways. So I would agree that I don't know that this committee has a central role, but other than putting it in the budget and giving the money when it's asked for. So.
Mr. Chairman, I would submit that's not housing, but the infrastructure for housing. And I think we do a lot of that, which is good, but just housing for employees like these things have been asked for. I think there's probably someplace else that ought to be working at.
Where would that be?
Minerals Corporation.
Has Minerals ever dealt with housing?
Yeah. Yeah, they have not well, but.
Okay, any other suggestions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, looking at the calendar, would it be possible to do that June meeting the first week of June instead of the last week of June?
15 topics. Are we off the topics now and onto the calendar?
Well, let's go. Anyone else want to bring up a topic that's here we have not discussed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Erica Legursky, again, Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. One of the topics that we would like you to consider is the critical infrastructure topic. We had House Bill 196 that was brought by Representative Henderson, and we appreciate him doing that. As you know, there are 16 critical infrastructure sectors. Here in Wyoming, energy is the most prevalent and one that we have. As the assurance of the energy production has cascade effects on other sectors, Wyoming exports around 90% of its energy to more than 20 different states. The security of the infrastructure has a great impact on the economics of our state. Therefore, the security of the energy in our state, the most critical infrastructure, including the security industry, is owned by the private sector. Developing trust and partnerships within this sector affects all the other 15 sectors. So this interim topic would allow us to evaluate critical infrastructure protection and practices within the state, both physical and cyber. Staffing could have a large focus on the energy sector, especially with the transition into the nuclear energy production in Wyoming, as well as foreign investments that are near military facilities. The study could also include looking into the establishment of a security council for the purposes of planning and directing the collection of threat data, processing the data, conducting analysis of the data through actionable information and intelligence, and also intelligence sharing, and disseminate the results to prevent critical infrastructure partners, policymakers, and first responders. The committee could further identify and establish the resources needed to complete and identify the goals, such as additional legislation that might be needed or funding systems and positions. It could provide a clear understanding of the role of the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security within the state of Wyoming and how it plays with our Fusion Center, as well as the roles of the Fusion Center itself. Understanding the functions of the Secretary of State's office with regards to foreign business sales. It might also identify other industries that would play a role in these critical infrastructure sectors, such as water development, the Public Service Commission, and the military department.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
So why does the governor's office think that's appropriate for the appropriations?
Mr. Chairman, we debated about this. We had some conversations with Representative Henderson since he did bring forward House Bill 196. You are also the home committee for the governor's office, which Homeland Security is within our agency. And so that's why we thought that this would be a good committee. We are fine with it being in another committee. We just wanted to bring that to you, like I said, with the work that we've done with Representative Henderson and the fact that you are our home committee.
Mr. Co-Chair, one follow-up. Since you're familiar with the Metcalf Road incident several years ago.
I'm not, sir.
Okay, well, it was a substation out in California that two people with high-powered rifles took out over a period of 20 minutes and disappeared well before the police showed up, and while somebody in a coordinated underground vault sliced some wires. And it plunged a huge part of that valley into darkness for a period of time. And that set off alarm bells. And there's a huge effort between utilities and the federal government and federal Homeland Security on a critical infrastructure initiative. I would think that our governor's office would already be involved in that one way or another. I'm not sure what value we're going to add to what's already underway. Or is the governor's office not involved in that federal initiative?
Mr. Chairman, I've got Mickey Munson and Deputy Director Nyken here. They can answer those. I think where we were looking at this was more of a coordinated effort within the state as a whole. How do we work within those agencies if there is an incident? How do we call those agencies up? How do we identify some of the property that's being purchased currently next to our Air Force Base? Just some of those things to make sure that we do have that. Currently, right now, Director Budd is at a conference, which is the Governor and Homeland Security Advisory Council, where she is there and has had several conversations with Director Easterly, who is the CISA Director, the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency Director. They've had a lot of conversations with regards to this. This is kind of the main topic of their conference that they are at right now, is critical infrastructure protection with an emphasis on cybersecurity. So we are in those conversations. This is just more of a coordinated effort that we would like to try and do within the state.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, I'm Mickey Munson. I'm the Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Program Manager for the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. And part of my job is building those partnerships with that the energy sector, the water sector, so they report those incidents. A lot of these attacks that are happening within the critical infrastructure sector, either in the state of Wyoming or nationwide, aren't always being reported to the state. They do go to the federal level, but the federal level is very limited on how they can assist in those. And so in those instances, in this council would help us bring to light those threats to our critical infrastructure and build those partnerships with the energy sector, the water sector, all 16 sectors, so they know who to report them to and who's going to help them. Because some of them do go to local law enforcement, but that's where it stops. Either they don't investigate it or they do and they don't have another resource to provide information. And working with the Fusion Center and within our agency, with the Fusion Center network, they can reach out to all the Fusion Centers nationwide and see what other instances are like this are happening around the state, just like in North Carolina, in Washington, and some of those others. The state Fusion Center and their state Homeland Security offices are most of the time behind the scenes, helping provide information on what those threats are and helping that investigation go further.
So, Mr. Chairman, back in the Jonah days, I run this bill twice on critical infrastructure, and there's some components missing out of this on the federal side because we've got the interstate infrastructure as well that we need to get identified and determine and further define what is critical infrastructure and what that represents. You'll recall that there was a lot of pushback from people who felt like they were being told that they can't demonstrate and you can't do some of these other things. We never have resolved that, and I think we've only expanded with our cyber stuff and the other things that we need and other energy stuff that I think we need to define, have it in state law to then give Homeland Security the authority to administer and protect those assets. Is that a fair?
Yes, Mr.
summary?
Chairman, that would also help us do prevention, right? Instead of response. So we're saving money on the front end, doing the prevention, providing the threats and analysis beforehand. So that response, it lowers that response and that threat level because we're being preventative on the front end, making everybody aware of the threats to the energy sector, to the water sector, to whatever 16 sectors. A lot of eyes are on the state of Wyoming for our energy. We do export over 90% of our energy to other countries. So if the lights go out in Wyoming, they go out in 20 other states. And so it'll allow us to better do my job on helping provide information to our private sector on what they're being targeted for.
Mr. Coach. Sounds like a great idea for a bill. I don't see a lot of value add from a legislative committee taking it on as an interim topic. I mean, you're pushing ahead. You're the executive branch. You've got all the resources. You know what needs to be done. You know the areas you can work in. If there's some gap that you need some legislative authorization to fill, then I'd bring a bill. I don't know. Personally, I don't think you're going to add anything by having a
Mr.
interim legislative.
Mr. Chairman, it seems a bit odd to, if you have an issue that we care about, to say the executive branch will just deal with it and let the executive branch drive the car completely. It seems like the legislature has a role to play and we're going to spend money on something and there's going to be an appropriation and we ought to know what's going on so that we don't find out about it just 7 days before the session starts next year. Seems like it could be worthwhile use of our time in the interim.
So I do think, I think we have a duty and an obligation to know exactly what you're doing and what your needs are, and what works and what isn't, how much is being spent and what more we could do. Unless someone does that homework and teaches us what we need to know, how can we help you? So it just makes sense to me.
I think that's what I said.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Go ahead.
this may be a good topic too for management audit, in addition to ANI, ETS, the understanding the needs of some of these state agencies. What I guess may be helpful for any interim committee is for you to identify what the legislative needs are, because the chairman is right. A great deal of what you're expressing is an executive branch function, but certainly a topic that I think we all care deeply about, have an interest in. I know I do have a deep interest in it. So I would take it up just because I'm interested in the topic, but I don't know that it is germane to this committee. But it's not clear to me what the legislative asks are. Certainly understand the importance and understand Wyoming's role in the energy space. and what critical infrastructure is. So help us identify what those legislative asks would be, and then we can help determine an appropriate committee before March 23rd of interim topics.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Senator Nethercutt, that's a good point. We do have a lot of state agencies that would be involved in this. I think one of the things that we have talked about is the Safe to Tell program that's already up and running. It does not have the capabilities to gather this type of information. That information has not been included in that. That could be something that could be maybe a system ask. We do know that within the Secretary of State's office that they are not currently recording this information. So I think within this study, we would have to see if there was some changes to that application or change in processes that would need to be made. And then also we had the information sharing aspect. Like we said, some of these things may be reported to law enforcement or may be reported to the federal government, just making sure that we have that information that we can share with our partners. And then I do envision that there would probably be some position asks, whether that be in the Secretary of State's office, with the Guard, if there was something that we did to activate them. And then more than likely in the Office of Homeland Security, we would probably need an energy sector person, just because that is such a large sector for critical infrastructure. And then maybe one or two more positions in order to help gather this data, analyze this data, and then share that information out. So that's kind of what we were looking at.
Okay. So there's a couple Commerce Committee meetings that are supposed to start in the next few minutes. So any other, before we adjourn today, any other comments?
Thank you, Mr.
Dates.
Chairman.
Calendar.
Okay, quickly, let's go to dates. The answer is I can't do it the first week in June.
Second.
Let me see.
Mr. Co-Chair, I'm gone the first and second week in June. I don't have to be here, but unless there's a compelling reason, I'd like to be here. What's the issue with the first and second week of June?
So it looks like right now we've got a tentative schedule for June 20th and 24th. Is that right?
No.
22nd through 24th. Okay, yellow.
Yeah, yellow.
The question is, can we move that to a earlier time? I think is the question. Like,
Correct, and I'm gone all of June until the 19th. I don't know what other conflicts other people have. I mean, just if it's a matter of convenience, or is it somebody else has got a big conflict that can't be here? Hey, when's your conflict?
Mr. Chairman.
What if we moved it to July? Is that a problem?
4th of July is kind of a problem for me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
we do it in land or we can do it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
June is also really difficult. I moved everything around to make the 27th, 28th, but July would, no.
I'm gone.
What about the week of the July 10th?
That works.
That works, July 10th.
So
Mr. Chairman, that's when I was branding, but I'll move my branding.
10th and 11th would be better. 10th and 11th?
Yeah. Yeah, if we do it on the 10th and 11th, I suggest we do it here for the benefit of staff. Where they're not having to travel on Sunday, and then for you, those of you that are on the SBC on the 12th.
Okay, let's just do that for now.
That's the June meeting.
We're scratching June 27 and 28. And we're adding July 10 and 11.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest that somebody bring birthday cake.
And then, Mr. Co-Chair, in December, our committee had quite a bit of discussion about December because originally we were running through the 22nd. And we still did schedule the 18th, 19th with caveat that some of us may be zooming in. That's that whole Christmas travel week.
But didn't we move to January?
We moved 2 of those days. We scratched 3 in December and moved 2 to January.
Yeah.
To the 4th and 5th. I want the committee to focus in on that. If that's an issue, let's talk about it.
Well, the biggest issue is going to be for LSO. Talk to us a little bit about that, Don.
Mr. Chairman, under the proposed schedule, you're actually scratching 4 days in December, the 11th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd. You're adding back 2 in January, on January 4th and 5th. This committee has worked expeditiously in the past, so it's quite possible you could do your work with 2 fewer days. I believe I did speak with the Senate members. It's likely that Polly and Elizabeth will be staffing on the 4th, possibly the 5th, because that could conflict with the Craig meeting.
Saturday the 16th.
Likely will be. Well, I think, the 4th and 5th, Polly and Elizabeth can solo. I mean, it's probably good experience for them to solo while Don's off doing Craig. I think they'll do just fine.
So it doesn't make sense to me to only do like the 18th and 19th.
Okay,
So why don't we do the 20th as well? And frankly, we could probably get by without the 4th and the 5th. That would be my inclination.
scratch 4th and 5th and add 20.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Team?
Yeah. Basically. We'll
What was
have a-
that, Tom?
We'll know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then in
January, that-
January, leave the last week of January available, the 20th through the 26th if needed.
Or the 20th, yeah.
And last week in
Okay, Don.
January is the 22nd to the 26th.
What's the first day of session? February,
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's the 14th. Excuse me, 12th.
well,
So we scratched January 4 and 5, and we added December 20.
correct.
Can you zoom in from Brazil?
Oh, you'd be zooming on it.
Yeah, the question is, can we zoom to Brazil?
Okay,
Subject to change.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to your first 2 meetings, July and August, do you have a tentative location for either of those? So July 10th and 11th, the location, and August 22nd and 23rd?
Mr. Chairman, I would just recommend in the July meeting, we do it here so that LSOs not having to travel on Sunday and then those that are participating on SBC on Wednesday would already be here.
I thought typically the earlier meetings we tried to do not in Cheyenne because the later meetings are all in Cheyenne.
I think that's accurate. I'm just trying to accommodate the needs of staff and recognize their life and then the commitments that Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters have on the 12th, which is here as well.
So August, do you want to, on August, do you want to go to Lander or River?
Go somewhere else.
Go ahead.
One of the suggestions that I made for the August meeting was the new military museum in Du Bois. They have a new $20 million facility with up-to-date audiovisual. So just an idea.
Can we put you on that and see if you can set that up? for us?
I can do that, sir.
Okay.
It's really cool. Put Tara in a tank.
Okay. Anything else for now, Don?
Mr. Chairman, no, we assume that we'll get some direction from the co-chairs as to consolidation of the topics you've discussed.
Okay. Let's stand.